When I was 20, my husband disappeared. Not in some dramatic, mysterious way. There was no tragedy, no crime, no whisper of foul play. He just packed a bag and walked out the door while I was in the shower. I had asked him to look after Ryan, who was only 2 months old at the time. Ryan had been crying, as newborns do, his little face scrunched up in pain, his fists waving in the air. My husband had never had much patience for the sound. More than once I had caught him slipping out for a breath of air when the crying got too much for him. But this time he never returned. When I stepped out of the shower, the house was silent. Too silent. The cot was empty, except for Ryan, red-faced and crying. The wardrobe door was ajar, the hangers swaying in the absence of his clothes. That was 18 years ago. Now Ryan is a man. His broad shoulders fill the doorway as he stands in the kitchen, his voice deep and sure, but still tinged with the warmth of the boy who once clung to my side. He is my pride, my whole world, the one thing I have done right in my life. We were each other's everything. When he was little, he would crawl into my bed after nightmares, his little body pressed close, his breath warm against my arm. As he grew, our closeness never faded. We talked about everything, everything, hopes, fears, dreams. He told me about his first crush, his first heartbreak, his plans for the future. I never said no, but he never asked for much. He was good, always good. He never made my life difficult. If anything, he made me feel complete. And then today, he stood in front of me, hesitant, his eyes flickering down. That's the way he always was when he was embarrassed. My heart gave a little squeeze at the sight of him. "What is it, Ryan?" I asked gently. He exhaled, then spoke, his voice soft. Lynx invited me to spend the night with her. Lynx, his girlfriend. I knew this moment would come, the moment when someone else would become the center of his universe, but I wasn't ready for it. "Oh, great," I said, my voice lighter than I felt. "Who else will be there?" Ryan shifted his weight, moving from one foot to the other. "Mum, it's just Lynx and me, that's all." The words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. My boy, my baby, was about to spend his first night with a girl. The realization washed over me, a strange mixture of pride and something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't jealousy. No, that would be ridiculous. But there was a finality to his words. A door closing, a new one opening. I watched him, taking in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clenched at his sides. He was nervous. Of course he was. He was standing on the edge of something unknown, something exciting and terrifying. Memories stirred in me, unbidden. The first time I stood on that precipice, heart pounding, anticipation curling up in my belly like a secret. The rush of warmth at the thought of skin against skin, the way a single touch could ignite something deep inside. I swallowed and pushed those thoughts away. This wasn't about me. This was Ryan's moment. But even as I reassured him that everything would be all right, even as I smiled and reassured him that Lynx obviously cared for him, something inside me felt restless, like an ache that had been dormant for years was slowly, slyly waking up. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, his nervous energy filling the space between us. His hands fidgeted in his lap, fingers tapping against his knee in a silent rhythm. There was a vulnerability about him at that moment, an insecurity he rarely showed. He had always been so sure of himself, so stable in his own way. But this was different. This was unfamiliar to him. I opened the laptop, the glow of the screen casting a soft light across the dim room. It felt strangely intimate, sitting together like this, his shoulder almost brushing mine as I navigated through the folders. I started with simple diagrams, anatomical, clinical, nothing too overwhelming. I wanted him to understand the mechanics first, how to move, how to touch without causing discomfort. He watched intently, his eyebrows furrowed in concentration as he traced the delicate lines of the drawings. "You must be patient," I murmured. letting my fingers hover over the paintings. The body responds to care, not force. See here? This is how you ease her into it. His throat swelled with a small gulp, and I noticed his breathing slowing, his concentration sharpening. He was taking this seriously. I continued, pulling up a series of instructional images that were more than just technical, guides to anticipation, the importance of gentle exploration. His fingers curled into the fabric of his jeans as he absorbed each lesson. It was endearing, this eagerness to learn, this desire to make his first time memorable, not just for himself, but for the girl he cared about. And then the videos. Educational, carefully curated content, the kind used in structured classes. Nothing vulgar, nothing rough, just gentle, slow demonstrations of tenderness, of patience. I glanced at him as the first video began to play, the quiet stillness of voices explaining each move in calm, professional tones. His jaw tightened slightly, his chest rising and falling in steady, measured breaths. His eyes never left the screen. I watched his expression change. Curiosity, understanding, a flicker of something deeper that I recognized but chose not to acknowledge. His fingers flexed against his knee, an unconscious response to the growing awareness that was settling over him. "See how he waits?" I murmured, keeping my voice even. "How he lets her lead when she's ready?" A slow nod. I reached out, letting my hand rest lightly over his, just for a moment. "It's about connection," I said quietly. "It's about making her feel safe." Another nod. Slower this time. His fingers twitched under mine, warm, strong, uncertain. The next video played. The movements on the screen were fluid, deliberate, the kind of touch that wasn't just about sensation, but emotion. His breathing had deepened, his concentration unwavering. I wondered what thoughts were going through his mind, if he was imagining himself in those moments, if he felt the weight of what was to come. He had asked for my help, and I was guiding him as best I could. I just hadn't expected the air between us to feel so charged. His voice cut through the low hum of the video, soft but firm. A question, simple in its phrasing, yet heavy in its weight. My breath caught for a moment, the steady rhythm of my thoughts breaking as I processed what he had just asked. He had always been open with me, always trusted me with his concerns, his doubts. But this was new. He wasn't just asking for knowledge, he was asking for guidance, for something deeper than instruction. I turned to him, studying his face in the dim light of the screen. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only sincerity, the kind that made my heart ache at how much he still looked to me for answers. "Would you like me to show you?" The words left my mouth before I had time to think them through. A small nod. A breath, slow and measured, before he spoke again. "For her. I love her." The sincerity in his voice tugged at something inside me. He had never said it out loud before, not like that. Love. It hung in the air between us, making the moment something tender, something delicate. I let the silence settle between us, searching for the right words. He had always been careful with his emotions, but now they were exposed in a way I'd never seen before. The weight of his first love, his first time, the desire to make everything perfect. It overwhelmed him. I reached forward and placed a hand lightly over his. It was warm under my touch, his fingers curled slightly, uncertain. "All right." The quiet response made his shoulders relax, though his breathing remained steady and controlled. I shifted, turning to face him, my hand rising slowly, deliberately. He watched, his gaze flickering between my fingertips and my face, his chest rising and falling in silent anticipation. I traced the air just above his skin, the closeness creating a subtle warmth, a connection without pressure. A pulse beat steadily beneath the surface. His or mine? I wasn't sure. I moved cautiously, my hand brushing the inside of his wrist, feeling the slight tremor there. The breath he let out was barely audible, but I noticed the way it passed through him, the way his fingers twitched slightly before relaxing again. It's not about rushing, I murmured, my voice even and steady. It's about listening, about knowing when to move and when to wait. The space between us had shifted, something fragile yet unspoken passing through it. His focus never wavered. Every move I made mirrored in his own breath, his own awareness. I watched as he took it all in, not just the mechanics, but the intention behind it. The way patience molded the experience into something deeper. There was no urgency, no need to push beyond what the moment allowed. Just understanding, silent and unspoken, filling the air between us. The air in the room was heavy, still wrapped in something unspoken. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast long shadows, stretching and shifting with every small movement. He sat across from me, watching, waiting, his breathing soft but steady. I ran my fingers over the curve of my hip, slow and deliberate. My palm flattened against the fabric that covered me, over my stomach, along my ribs, up to my throat, where my pulse thundered beneath my touch. A map of sensation, a silent lesson in control and patience. His gaze followed, tracing every movement, his body still but alert. Then I reached for his hand. Would you like to support the girls on the channel? Watch the videos every day? Support us with a donation of any amount at the link in the description. His fingers were warm, his palm broad but hesitant as I ran them along the same path. Over the curve of my side, up the slope of my collarbone, lightly through my hair. He mimicked every move with care, his movements soft, controlled. I felt a twinge of pride. He understood. He didn't just follow, he felt. I turned my back to him now, pulling my hair over one shoulder to expose the soft slope of my neck. The air was cool against my skin, contrasting with the heat that lingered from his touch. See how the neck flows into the back? My voice was calm even. Follow it. Just 2 fingers. A pause. Then the ghost of his touch. 2 fingertips gliding along the path I had drawn for him. A slow descent from the base of my skull, down the curve of my spine, pausing just at the edge where bone softened into muscle. My skin prickled in response, a wave of warmth rolling in its wake. With the other hand, I murmured, go from here. I guided his second hand to my ribs, letting him feel the way breath moved beneath the surface. To here, I brought him lower, to the hollow of my back. He hesitated for a moment, then followed, his hands moving in tandem, mirroring my rhythm. Not hurried, not mechanical, but deliberate, fluid. His fingers adapting to the subtle shifts in my body, feeling rather than just touching. A small hum of approval built up in my chest. He was doing it right. He repeated the motion again and again, each pass more certain than the last. The air between us pulsed with quiet understanding, his breath measured and steady, mingling with mine in the stillness of the room. It was a lesson in patience, in awareness. The slightest change in pressure, the warmth of fingertips against bare skin, it all meant something. I could feel it. And so could he. The soft glow of the lamp spread across the room, casting a golden light over the folds of the sheets, the angles of the walls, the line of my shoulders. It softened everything, enveloping us in a quiet, suspended moment, where the world outside seemed to fade into insignificance. He was focused, completely absorbed in every movement, as if the simplicity of touch was a delicate art that required all his concentration. The warmth of his hands replaced mine, his palms carefully tracing the paths I had shown him. There was no urgency in the way he moved, only a quiet determination to get everything just right, to understand every nuance. My skin reacted, despite the simplicity of it all, a slight shiver at the softest brush of his fingers. Each touch was leisurely, measured, his hands learning the curves and hollows that seemed to draw him in. I told myself it was just teaching, but the warmth that followed each glide of his palm, the slight tremor that pulsed beneath my skin, betrayed the calmness I was trying to maintain. Feel how it follows the shape, I whispered, guiding his hand along the subtle dip of my waist, the way the muscles tensed beneath. Gently. It's not about pressure, it's about where it lingers. He nodded, his breath steady, mirroring mine. The air was thick with the scent of lavender from the sheets, mingled with the soft hum of electricity in the lamp. It filled the space between us, a reminder that this was real, present. His fingers, now confident, slid along the line of my chest, tracing the faint curve of my side before settling on the small of my back. The sensation was a slow blossoming of warmth, deep and subtle, a ripple of awareness beneath each touch. My body responded without thought, as if the closeness, the simple weight of his hands, was enough to stir something long dormant. Every movement was precise, cautious, yet there was an intimacy underneath, unspoken but undeniably felt. I stood in the doorway after he left, the sound of his car fading into the night, swallowed up by the quiet hum of the world outside. 18 years and there had never been a night when he wasn't under this roof, when his presence wasn't a familiar warmth in the other room. But tonight, he was elsewhere, stepping into something new, into a night that would mark a change neither of us could take back. I had prepared him well. He had absorbed every touch, every lesson, every movement, until my hands were no longer needed. He was ready, eager, steady in his confidence. The image of him holding the gift lingered in my mind, the small weight of the box in his hands, the quiet anticipation in his eyes. He had chosen it carefully, spent his own money, a piece of himself wrapped in a ribbon. It was a gesture I recognized, one that took me back to a time when love had been new, when my own hands had trembled at the thought of giving something to someone I cared about. I remembered his father, not as he was in the end, but as he had been in the beginning, the way he had looked at me then, the way he had reached for me with the same mixture of hesitation and desire, as if the whole world could be understood in the space between a touch and a breath. The weight of nostalgia settled deep in my chest, pressing against the silent pain that had been there for so long that I had almost forgotten how heavy it was. The silence in the house stretched, unfamiliar and unsettling. I moved slowly around the room, my fingers brushing the edges of the furniture, feeling the cool surface of the kitchen counter, the smooth grain of the wooden table. Everything was the same as it had always been, yet it felt different now, as if his absence had shifted something invisible. The bed felt too big when I finally slipped under the covers. The sheets were cool against my skin, the fabric soft, but there was no familiar voice in the next room, no soft breathing to lull me to sleep. I turned on my side and stared at the empty space beside me, at the way the darkness drew in the corners of the room. The warmth from earlier still lingered faintly in my skin, a memory just below the surface, a whisper of something that had passed between us. I exhaled slowly and closed my eyes, willing myself to let the silence take me. The weight of the day pressed down on me, thick and unshakable. The house had never felt so vast, the silence stretching through every empty room like an unseen presence. I lay in bed, the sheets cool against my skin, my body sinking into the mattress as thoughts swirled, slow and heavy. Memories of him surfaced first, the boy I had once loved, the one who had burned through my life like wildfire, leaving only embers in his wake. He had been reckless, untamed, a force that had drawn me in with the promise of something greater, something brighter, and for a moment I believed it. But that fire had gone out too soon, leaving me alone with a baby in my arms, with a life that suddenly felt so much heavier than I had ever imagined. And now that baby was a man, a different kind of man, calm, thoughtful, tender in a way his father had never been. I had watched him today, the way his hands followed mine, the way he had absorbed every movement with such careful intent. He had learned not just technique, but patience, control, the unspoken language of touch. The thought of it sent a slow warmth through me, a quiet ripple spreading beneath my skin. My fingers moved without thought, brushing over my collarbone, tracing the line of my neck where the warmth from earlier still lingered. It, it was a familiar path, but tonight it felt different. I let my hands wander lower, down my sides, feeling the soft curve of my waist, the way my breath moved beneath my ribs. My palms flattened against my stomach, sliding along the dips of my hips, slow and searching. A small sigh slipped from my lips. I shouldn't think about it, but the sensation of hands, his hands, mimicking mine, following every movement with careful precision, was now woven into me. The memory of it clung to my skin, a whisper of something that refused to fade. I exhaled and pressed my fingers into the softness of my thigh, my body stirring at my own touch. The air in the room felt thicker, the warmth from the lamp casting a glow over the sheets, over the curves of my body, enveloping me in something still and heavy. I closed my eyes and let myself sink into the feeling, into the echoes of the day, the way touch had been learned and memorized. The night stretched on, long and silent. The house kept its silence like a secret. No footsteps, no murmur from another room. Just me, alone, wrapped in the silence of my own breath, my own thoughts. But the past did not sleep. It pressed against me, relentlessly, pulling me back to a time when I was young, reckless, burning with something too fierce to contain. He had been all fire, all sharp edges, his touch never patient, never cautious. I had mistaken hunger for love, mistaken being wanted for being cherished. And then he was gone. 18 years, and I had learned to wear that emptiness like a second skin. But tonight, the weight of it felt different. My fingers moved absent-mindedly over the sheets, feeling the warmth of my own body beneath them. The fabric was damp where my skin had pressed against it, the heat lingering in the folds. I hadn't even noticed. Something low and deep curled in my stomach, a recognition, an inevitability. I inhaled, slowly and deeply, and as I did, the tension inside me wound tight, too tight. It was pulling, stretching, until it broke in a wave that tore through me, too sudden to brace for, too strong to suppress. A sound broke from my lips, raw and unbidden, piercing the silence like lightning through the darkness. It It wasn't just a feeling, it was memory, it was longing, it was every pain I had ignored, every whisper of touch that had gone unanswered for years. It took only moments, a rush, a shudder, and then silence. My breath was uneven, my limbs heavy, my body sinking deeper into the sheets as the last traces of warmth pulsed beneath my skin. And then only the silence remained, a reminder of how alone I was. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window, soft and golden, casting a quiet glow over the room. The air was still heavy with the remnants of the night, my thoughts, the lingering warmth beneath my skin, the weight of loneliness pressing into the silence. But then the door swung open, shattering everything. He moved through the house with the ease of someone who had discovered something new, something exciting. His face was bright, his steps swift, his energy impossible to ignore. And then, arms around me, his body warm from the crisp morning air outside. "Thank you, Mum. It worked. She was so happy. Thank you." His voice carried through the room, filled with something pure and unfiltered, a joy so radiant it almost startled me. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Pride swelled inside me, deep and quiet. I had led him to this moment, given him what he needed to make her feel valued, to make this night more than just an act. And he had done it on his own, with his own hands, with his own care. I looked at him, at the way his face lit up with something untouchable, and I saw not my little boy, but a man. So I invited them for dinner. They arrived together, their presence filling the house in a way that was painfully familiar. The way their hands brushed each other absent-mindedly, the way they leaned into each other with ease, the silent language between them. I had seen it before, years ago. I watched them from across the table, my fingers wrapped around the stem of my wineglass, my mind slipping between the present and the past. They were too much like us, like him and me, when love was all we thought we needed. The way she looked at him, the way he reached for her. It was everything I once believed in. And then, months later, he came to me with a ring. His voice carried the same determination, the same unshakable belief that love was enough, that he had found the person he wanted forever. I told him to wait, not because I doubted his feelings, not because I wanted to take this happiness away from him, but because I had been in the same place before. I had felt that certainty, trusted that love alone was enough to make a life. But there was more to life than love. And for the first time, he wasn't listening, but she was. She held his hands, spoke softly to him, told him she loved him, but not yet, not now. I saw the hurt flicker in his eyes, the way his fingers tightened around hers before he nodded, slowly and resigned. And I was relieved. For her. For him. But the question hung in the air long after the conversation had ended, lingering in the quiet corners of my mind. He had found something real, something deep. And yet here I was, standing alone in the doorway as he drove away, watching the car disappear down the street, wondering, how can I find this for myself? Like this video and subscribe to Nasty Talks. Don't forget to send this video to your friends on WhatsApp so they can enjoy it too. Thanks for being here with me.